Hi everyone, and welcome back to CHOMPI Club. In this video, we are going to be doing something a bit different in that we aren't going to be playing much music, but instead we are going to be customizing CHOMPI's hardware. So we're going to transform this Classic Black unit into a Treasure Island CHOMPI. So that means we're going to walk through the process of swapping out the panels. We'll swap out the key caps. I'm also going to include the process of swapping the key switches as well, just in case that information would be helpful to some of you. Of course, a lot of these things are optional and you can bounce around throughout the video to things that you're going to be focused on and wanting to know more about. But I figured I would just go through the entire process from start to finish in case that is just helpful to see everything all at once. And one thing I would include before we get started is that I don't know how many of you know this, but I don't see very well. So some of this is going to look a little bit like clumsy and clunky because I do things a little bit different than probably everybody else does. But that's why. But I guess I'm trying to do that and showcase the fact that I can still do it. And, I have to make some accommodations and, adjust my process a bit. However, it's not very hard. It's a pretty simple process, and it's a little bit like playing Legos for synthesizers. Before we get started, I figured it might be nice to talk about some of the tools that I'm going to be using. And, there's going to be a lot of different variations of these tools out there, but they're, for the most part, fairly common tools. I'll show you some that you have to have, and then some that are just nice to have, and some of the tips and tricks along the way. So before you open up your CHOMPI, you're going to need some sort of screwdriver of some kind. So we've shipped CHOMPI with two different types of screws so far. The first was a 2mm Allen head screw, and they're M3 screws, by the way. And we got some feedback from customers early on that they just, we realized that not everybody actually has access commonly to a 2mm Allen screwdriver. So we adjusted and switched to a more common Phillips head screw. So you might have one or the other. Either way, the process is the same, but the tool obviously is going to be different. So this one is going to be the 2mm Allen, and then this is just a common Phillips head. This one's a little bit more like small and petite. I would recommend not using a really big one, just because sometimes that will end up being too big for the screw and you might strip something. But anyway, you need some sort of screwdriver. For the handle though, you will need, whether or not you have the Phillips or the Allen, you will need a 2.5mm Allen for these two bolts in the back. So this one is the same no matter what. So you're going to definitely need those. If you're going to be changing out the keyboard, it's nice to have something like this, which is a switch or a cap puller, and then this is a switch puller. You can find these all over the place. If you look for mechanical keyboard tool, you'll find they're probably going to look, there's a ton of different versions of this, but they do pretty much all the same thing. So those would probably be nice to have. You can do it, other ways. I've seen people do it with like dental floss and some other, different tips and tricks, but I probably won't go that road. I'd rather show you the way that I do it. And then let's move on to the things that are just nice to have. You probably don't have to have either one of these, but one is this little, I guess I'll zoom in just a little tiny bit so you can see this a little better. This is a tool that definitely don't need to have, but man, it makes life a lot easier to have the ability to just get underneath stuff and also just to like, have a sharp end on something. Similarly, you could use some needle nose like tweezers. That also is really helpful for certain things. Again, not required at all, but yeah. And then another nice thing to have is some sort of like paintbrush. I use a really clean one, not a used paintbrush. Or you can use like electronics, like canned air. And it's really just to get the dust off, or if you open up the panels and you see you got some debris or something in there that you want to get out, that's a nice way to do it. But definitely not something that you have to have, just a nice thing. I think that covers it for the most part. I might include a couple other little things as we go along, but for the most part, that should definitely cover your basis in terms of what tools you might want to have at hand when you do this. And I guess that means we can just go ahead and get started. The first steps that you're going to need to do, probably before you do anything else, even if all you're doing is messing with or adjusting the keyboard, is removing these encoder knobs. So these 5 encoders here are spring clip inside. They have a little metal clip I'll zoom in so that you can see what I'm talking about here. And so the first time that you remove them, it might be a little bit stiff because of that metal clip in there, but there isn't a screw or anything like that to, you know, keep them in place. So they do come off, they're just gonna feel really stiff probably at first. The best thing is just using 2 points of pressure on either side of the knob, and it should just come right off if you pull straight up. So we're gonna get these off of there before we can get the top panel off, and then we're gonna take the screws off. So this one uses the Phillips, so we're gonna start by just putting these off to the side here. I like having a nice little work area. This is a rubber mat that I use a lot, and it's nice to be able to have a little bit more flexibility in terms of not having like a table at an angle that these things just start rolling and going all over the place. You can also use like these little containers are nice too. You can hold your screws in, and we'll probably do that with some of our keycaps and stuff as well. So almost done getting these screws out of there. Last one, and then the top panel should pop right off. Yep, there we go. So now we can have access to pretty much everything in our what we call the control board. So that's your keyboard. You can change out your keycaps, your key switches this way, and you shouldn't have to do pretty much anything else. But we're going to keep going because I want to break it down at least to show you the rest of the side panel access. And of course, we're swapping out the panel, so we have to take them off anyway. So the order that I typically do it is I will do the top panel first, and then if you can see this, the two side panels are actually sandwiched together by the what we call the front panel and the rear panel. So I'm going to take the front off first, and we'll just unscrew this guy. And you can probably do this in different orders as well. It's just I find it's a little bit easier to do it that way. Another thing that I probably forgot to mention before is that if you want to make sure that your panels and stuff don't get fingerprints on them, you can use gloves as well. I forgot to mention that, but today I'm using B-stock panels and I don't think that I'm too worried about it. Okay, so I got the front off, and I can show you what that looks like. We can see right down the sandwich of Chompi, but I got to do the same thing on this side here if I want to swap things out, which means I need to loosen the handle bolts. So again, 2.5 millimeter, and they're going to be pretty tight most likely. This handle's on there pretty good, and it obviously needs to be strong because you're going to be hanging on to Chompi with it. So it's no stiffer than anything else, I suppose, but just so you know, it's going to be a little bit stiff. And I'll show you what that hardware looks like in case you haven't seen that as well. So loosen those up, and then we have these are like a little custom bolt situation going on. So there's like I don't know, I guess it's like a bolt slash, you could almost think of it like a spacer or a washer, and then it's an M4 screw there. So I'll put that off to the side here. Okay, so now we just have our 3 screws on the rear panel to deal with. And it doesn't really matter the order that we go in. Almost done here. And then I'll show you the side panels. So really, when you take those off, now you can see both access points straight through the Chompi sandwich. So last step is just getting these side panels off here. Should go fairly quick. Okay, so now we have all of our panels off except for the bottom panel. Now here's a little tip. I'm going to leave the bottom panel on for now because it acts as a foundation for everything else, especially when we're going to be aligning anything like the other panels when we put them on. So I'm going to do that one last. Of course, we are going to do it. It's just that'll be my last step in this process. I shouldn't have to get into that panel until we're all done. Okay, so now we're going to have a deep dive discussion, at least a pseudo deep dive discussion on the keyboard itself and keycaps and key switches. And of course, this video would be like 10 years long if I went into all of the specifics on this, because there's an entire subculture around mechanical keyboards. However, with regards to CHOMPI, I will try my best to just do like a very basic explainer video section here so that you can understand more of how it's built and how you can customize it. So the way that this keyboard is designed is that there are things called key switches, mechanical keyboard switches. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see. This here essentially is a button. That's its job. And the button works just like any other button. You push it down, it activates, you let it go, and it deactivates. This is the same exact kind of switch that you would see inside of a typing keyboard, or a gaming keyboard, or the type of keyboard that works with a computer, basically. And in fact, this brand of switch that is in CHOMPI, this is called a Cherry MX switch. And this particular one has a pink top here, and it is clear. And that is the profile of the switch. And basically that means the pressure of the switch, the amount of travel distance for that switch. And in this case also, this one is what we call a silent red. Sometimes people call them a pink switch. And the silent red means it doesn't have a, like a click sound when you press it, or has a minimal click sound. But yeah, when we were designing CHOMPI, we were like, well, we have a lot of switches to choose from. There's so many out there, and we wanted to go with something that felt like OG and very, very reliable and very dependable. In fact, these switches, mini switches, but this one in particular, should be rated for like 50 million key presses before they start to wear out, which is kind of insane to think about. But anyway, that is what is inside of CHOMPI. However, there are tons of different kinds of switches out there, and they have different names and different brands and different companies. And as long as they have an MX platform, meaning it's the same kind of basic pins on the bottom, as well as the top can be different. You can see, as long as there's that little X on the top, this one has the little support sides to it, and then this one is just the X by itself. But either way, the same key caps, the second part that goes on top, will still work with the MX platform on CHOMPI. So we're going to actually change out those today, but I figured I'd at least give you the basics of what a switch is. And then simultaneously, this is a key cap. That goes on top of the switch, and when you put it on that X, then that acts as like the topper for your button, or for your keyboard key, or in this case. So that's a very basic overview of how CHOMPI's keyboard is designed and built. And if you want to research mechanical keyboards, you can find so many videos and so many tutorials and other stuff out there that will probably do a much better job than my explanation. However, for CHOMPI's purposes, there are just these two components that we need to be worried about, which is the switch, and it is an MX platform switch, and the key cap. So the next step that I typically will do is I will start removing our key caps. And I'll just remove them all at the same time. The way I do that with this cap puller is that it's got these two little bars on it, and they go on either side of the cap itself, and then you just wiggle it off. And you don't have to have one of these. In fact, I could probably show, I have fairly big fingers, and I can still typically pull off. I have to be gentle, but I can pull off the switch, these bobos at least, once I have the top panel off, because I can get underneath them a bit more. So you could do that, but it's nice and clean to do it this way, and it keeps the cap straight when it comes off, and I like that. So I'll keep pulling these off here. All right, last one here. Pull off our CHOMPI key. All right, so now all of our keycaps are off, and I'm going to put those off to the side up here. And I shouldn't need my puller anymore. But now I can show you a bit closer. I'll zoom in again, and you can see what is going on with these switches. So the way that they work is they press down into this socket that's underneath there. You can see it underneath the second panel down, and that socket holds on to those two pins. But in order for the switch to stay nice and sturdy, it has to have this here, which is our mounting plate. And so when you look at the switches themselves, like aside from the mounting plate, I can zoom in a little bit more again. They have these little tabs, and the tab is what our switch puller is doing. It's pushing in on that tab, and then when you pull up, the tabs release from the plate, and we can get them out of there. So let's go ahead and try one really quick. I'm going to show you that in action. We're going to go with our switch puller. we're going to go into these two tabs on the top and bottom, and we're going to lift up on our switch. And it pulls those tabs and it pulls out of the panel. So you can see there's our socket there. And there's our LED as well. So that process is pretty straightforward, but I want to pause you here because I think that it's valuable to recommend not just taking all the switches off at the same time like we did with the caps. And the reason is this plate, the mounting plate, is nice and straight and everything is where it's supposed to be right now. So it's nice and easy to just do like a leapfrog style where you do like 3 or 4 at a time. Then you replace those and you do the next ones and so on and so forth. So I'm going to walk you through that. And while I do, there's one last thing I want to show in that. When you put one in, and zoom in here nice and tight so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so now when you put the new switch in, first off, you definitely got to pay attention to the orientation because our LED is at the top. So that little window there on these ones is going to be needing to face this direction. And that really matters with the pins that you're going to be putting in because they have a very specific pattern. So I'm going to put it into the socket loosely here. And then once it's there, I'm going to look down the side just like this and make sure I can see those 2 pins seat into where they're supposed to go. And that's also where this other tool comes in, which is kind of handy to have. And I will a lot of times lift up on my panel and push down, and I can see that snap right into place. And now I'm confident that that went into the right spot. Now it is possible, you know, if you're not paying attention to where the pins are going, it's possible to have a bent pin when you push your new switch in. So be patient and careful when you're doing that. Otherwise you might end up with a bent pin. Sometimes you can, you know, straighten one out. There's one pin typically on a switch that is a little bit thicker. You probably won't see it too well here. And then one that's thinner. And a lot of times that thinner one is the culprit. I don't know why they do that. I'm sure someone else on the internet knows, but yeah, that's definitely the one that you want to watch out for. So I find that the best way to do is just watch as the pins enter into the socket there, and you should be good. And like I said, you don't need this tool. You could do this with your fingers or something, but it's helpful to have. Okay, so why don't we just go through the rest of this keyboard here, and I will stop talking and we will do our cooking show before and after process, and I'll just speed this up a little bit. By the way, these switches are actually by a company called Kale. I think that's how you say it. I don't know for sure. And they have a funny name. They are called ice cream switches. And they have like I showed before, they have this little lens, which is kind of neat, and it amplifies the LED under there. They are a similar style profile to the ones that are currently on CHOMPI. They're made out of a different kind of plastic, so they have a slightly different sound. And then also, they are still a linear switch, they call it, but they're a little bit more clicky. I don't know if you can hear. They're not going to have the full-on tactile click to them. But I do find they're nice and responsive, and I wouldn't say that they're an upgrade or anything like that. They're just different, and then figure might as well show you another version. I've used these ones on my CHOMPI quite a bit, and I've had pretty good results so far. So I figured I would throw that in there. Before I do these ones, I'll show you like a perfect example. If I wait to do this final one on the end here, then it'll keep nice tension on my board. There's another like tension rod, like little standoff here as well, but it definitely just makes things easier when I'm putting these next ones in. So instead of taking all 5 off at the same time, I'm gonna leave this last one and this one, and then I'll do those independently. Okay, last one. Take this guy out. One more ice cream in here. All right. Okay, so one of the final steps I use this tool for is I will push down on my switches. I think all of them felt like they were seated nice and pretty sturdy. But if I lift up on the panel and I push down like pretty hard, you can sometimes feel like you can hear them almost like little popcorn. There's just this final little click press that can sometimes be needed, and it'll still work just fine without it, but I like to make sure they're seated nice and sturdy in there. Final ones, all feels good. All right, so Now, our key switches have been swapped out and changed. And I would say right now would be about the time if I were going to change the transport knob, I would do it now because you have the most access and easy to get to. It's got the same spring clip inside as these ones do, so it'll feel pretty sturdy on there and a little bit tricky to get up. So for that one, I recommend trying to get 3 points of pressure. I guess if I turn it like this, if I use 3 fingers, I can a lot of times just pull it off with my hand. But again, this is another one of those opportunities for this other little tool. You can get underneath the knob with this and pull up that way as well. But either way, there's no, like I've had a lot of questions come in of, is there a bolt or something that's tightening it on there because it feels so strong? But it's just tension. It's just that spring clip. So 3 points of pressure sometimes is the trick. And I'm not going to switch it out because the colorway we're working with is still going to keep the purple knob. But that is when I would be doing that. And then now I think it's a good time to swap out the key caps. So again, I showed you, I have a bunch of these loose ones for the marshmallows that I'm going to be putting on here. But they will typically, when we ship them, they come like this. So you'll have to take them out of your plastic wrap here. And then you're just paying attention to the orientation of the switch. Make sure that the lens is to the top, the LED lens, and you can just press them right down. It really shouldn't require much more than just pressing down on the cap itself, and it should just seat itself nice and cleanly right onto that X platform. All right, and then the last one here, just our CHOMPI key. So we're gonna put this guy down and we should be done with our, oh yeah, you can hear. These ones definitely have a different sound, a different feel, quite a bit more clicky, I guess. I like the extra springs sometimes. It depends on what I'm doing with CHOMPI. They're just going to have a different preference, and you'll have to pick out what switches work well for you. And like I said, as long as they're the MX platform, you can use 3-pin or 5-pin. You'll look on there and they'll have either the 2 little plastic pins that are the stability parts. But either way, they will all work on CHOMPI's platform. So that is the process of getting our keyboard switched out. Okay, so at this point, I want to show you guys something new that we've been working on that at the point of filming this video, actually, I don't think hardly anyone knows about. But this is a new accessory that we are offering with CHOMPI's very soon. And this essentially is like a little, we call it the mic booster. I'll zoom in here so you can see a little bit more on what it is. So essentially, for those that are more familiar with microphones, it's something that would be maybe akin to a shotgun style adapter for CHOMPI's mic. And it's a little foam compartment that will channel all of the sound right down directly into the microphone. And so it goes from the top panel, if I go back to my top panel here, this little cutout is right now going straight down into there. Now it does change the tone of the mic a little bit. I like the adjustment, I like the change, but the tone of the original mic is more like it pulls the whole space in, and so you get more, of the ambient, room sounds, and you get maybe more of like, I guess I'll say like a wider pattern, right? But consequently, you're also going to be getting more of the noise of, the handling of the instrument, and then just some of the other things that maybe you don't want to have. So what's nice about this is it is very optional. It will install very quickly. All you have to do is pull the top panel off and push this into the little socket, and it is sized exactly for this hole. And then you just want to push your thumb down on it so it seats nice, and we want that little chamber to work really, really tightly against the panel so that the mic can just shoot up sound, or the sounds really are going, I guess, are going to the mic, but they can go through the cutout and right down directly into the mic without any air coming through the sides. So that's pretty cool. Well, I'll show you some other things in the future about that, but I figured I would include this while we were doing the build. And then I think we can start talking about putting the panels back on, or at least the new panels. So obviously we haven't swapped out the bottom panel. This is probably a good time to just do that. The way that you do that is you have these 2 screws that are going to be the same as the others in the middle. And then I've gotten this question a lot because they're kind of a sneak attack. These rubber feet are actually screws. So when you typically see an instrument, a lot of times they're sticky, but this is a custom screw that we had created for CHOMPI. And these are really nice because if you change out the panels, there's nothing sticky for you to have to swap out. And I was really, I felt like it was such a small thing, but I'm really glad that we had these manufactured because I think they turned out really good. But they're definitely not going to be coming off like you would expect a sticky rubber foot to come off. You got to screw them off by hand. That'll be the last step, and then we can pull it off and we can see what is under the hood of CHOMPI. Yeah, in case that is something that you were curious about, that's what it looks like. So let's go ahead and put our new bottom panel on, which is our Treasure Island panel. Probably going to get all sorts of fingerprints on this now, but I'm going to be using this CHOMPI myself, so they're going to be my fingerprints. Hopefully yours are going to be a pretty similar situation. So I'll start with putting my rubber feet, basically the inverted of what I just did. The rubber feet will help me align the middle screws. And I just do these loose by hand. And then I'll put new screws back on. So this is something we made an announcement on. I'm not sure how obvious it is. And I guess obviously depending on when you're watching this video, it might be common knowledge. But we've got a third screw that we had sourced for CHOMPI. And this screw is kind of a combination of the two that we had before, and maybe the best of both worlds. I'll try to zoom in here and show you what it looks like. So this is a flat profile of a Phillips screw. Now it's definitely a little bit more like an electronic style screw, so a little bit smaller of a head in terms of what screwdriver it can take, but it will sit nice and flush on CHOMPI. So we're going to be using these. And that's kind of one of the things I was saying before when we were talking about the tools. Sometimes it's nice to have a little bit smaller of a screwdriver when you're doing this stuff. You don't want it to be so small. We're not talking like, you know, the ones that they repair like glasses and stuff with, but the head will sometimes matter quite a bit on how easy it is to work with, depending on, you know, which screw you have. And you'll notice I didn't tighten those screws all the way down. And the reason is, what we want to do is put all the panels on first, and then we're going to align everything to make sure that it's all going to be nice and sturdy and flush. Then the final step is to tighten down all the screws. So we can get them in place for now, but not going to be overly tightening. So then in reverse order, we're going to be putting in the side panels, then the rear and front panels, and then finally the top panels. Something I should make sure I mention is that these two side panels are actually reversible, meaning they're the exact same spec. And so technically you could actually put them on the wrong sides because the holes and everything will match up the same. So just be careful. You're going to be wanting to put the audio on the right side of CHOMPI, like if we're looking at it like this. The audio goes on this side, so that's the headphone and the audio in, the aux in, and then the MIDI goes on this side. So I figured I'd mention that before you get all the things put back on and then you realize you need to switch them back. I will probably put the rear panel on next. I feel like a lot of times that one is nice to have because I can then put the handle on, or at least loosely put it on. When I do the rear panel, I'm going to need to put this screw down because this one is behind the handle, and I'm going to loosely put it there so that I can get everything aligned just like everything else. But then before I get the handle in place, I actually need to tighten that one down, so I need to be a little bit more confident. I love this panel. I think this one is my favorite. It's so cool. A little nautical scene that's on there. Okay, we got all our panels in place, and then as you can tell, things are still pretty loose. All the alignment is able to be still moved. I can probably go a little bit tighter on some of these, just kind of going by feels to make sure that there's not too much tension so I can move it around. And then when I go to align everything, just so that you know what I'm looking at, is a lot of times I'll pay attention to sometimes the audio jack or definitely the USB-C jack. just to make sure that all of the ports and the cutouts and stuff are aligning correctly. And then again, because I can't see super well, a lot of times I just go by feel, and I feel the edges of the panels and where they're connecting. And sometimes if I just feel like that, I can shift it one way to the other and make sure that they're the same on both sides. They should be pretty much flush, but a lot of times you can just feel a little bit of a lip as they come to one side or the other. So now we can pretty much put the top panel on if we're not going to be doing anything else to our Chompi. And then the last step, we'll put the handle on. All right, so now what we're looking to do, you can kind of almost see it happen in real time here. What we're looking to do is make sure all of our side panels are aligned, and then you can see there's a little bit of flex with the way that these are set up. So it's kind of like a sandwich. I know I said that before, but it really is what it is. We want to make sure that all of our bottom screws get tightened first, because everything is basically built on that foundation and aligned off of that line. So I think based on what I'm feeling here that it feels pretty good to lock down. So I'm going to tighten these ones, and then I think everything else should be ready to final alignment. Yeah, it feels pretty good. I'm gonna do, before I do the side screws, I'm gonna do the top panel because it'll keep tension on everything. So I'm gonna kind of put pressure on both the front and back as I put these ones down, because that sandwich is getting created, and I'm just wanting to suction the two panels together. All right, feels good. Now I can just work around Chompi's exterior, making sure that everything still feels nice and aligned. All right, now a lot of times I'll do a little wiggle test to see no sound, we don't hear anything loose, everything feels nice and sturdy and feeling good. The last step here, I guess the second to last step, is obviously putting our handle back on. So I'm going to grab this hardware that we had from our other handle here. Sometimes, for me at least, it's nice to be able to have the screws in place and put them aligned like this, and then they kind of sit where they're supposed to sit. And before I tighten them down, I always do one last check to make sure that we're looking straight. It shouldn't feel forced at all. If your panel is aligned incorrectly, you might have a bit of, like, you might be catching on the cutout of the panel, so make sure you're paying attention to that. It should feel nice and smooth when you put the handle back on. And then a lot of times I'll look down the middle to make sure that the screw is nice and centered in there. It should be pretty natural. It just wants to do that because of those special bolt washers in there. Feels nice and sturdy. And then there we go. Shake test, feels nice and clean. The last step being put our encoder knobs on. And then we're pretty much done, you guys. So hopefully that helps show you some of the process of, I guess, maybe a little bit more behind the scenes of Chompi and the hardware and all that. Really, I just wanted to make sure that, some of the things that I do on a pretty daily basis. I've gotten so many people just say, you should just make a video. I think I've been a little bit self-conscious just because I know that my process is going to be slightly different with my vision than everybody else. But I hope that at least this shows you that it's very doable. You don't have to know a ton about this stuff. And in fact, you really don't need, a ton of tools either. And ultimately, we end up with pretty rad looking Chompi, if you ask me. Then the next step is just powering it up and playing some music. So hopefully that was helpful to you guys. Until next time, thank you so much for watching.